Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. Today I'm going to talk about police brutality. I'm going to show you two news clips and then provide my commentary on the other side.
Chris.
The 16-year-old charter school student says he was roughed up by Philadelphia police so bad during a recent arrest it sent him to the hospital with possible injuries that could last a lifetime. We do want to warn you, some of the details of this story are graphic.
And I'm just grateful that they just didn't kill him.
16-year-old Darren Manning is still having trouble walking a week later. He suffered serious injuries to his genitals. He claims came at the hands of a Philadelphia police officer during a recent arrest.
I think that was wrong. That was going overboard.
Manning, a sophomore at Mathematics, Civics, and Sciences Charter School, just got off the subway with about a dozen teammates in uniform on their way to play a high school basketball game. He says the group was confronted by police at Broad and Girard. Exactly why the students were stopped and questioned remains unclear. But Manning says he was put in handcuffs, then says during a pat-down, a female police officer squeezed his genitals so hard it ruptured his testicle.
She patted me down again, and then I felt her reach, and she grabbed my butt. And then she grabbed and squeezed again and pulled down. And that's when I heard something pop, like I felt it pop.
Hospital records show Manning spent the following night of his arrest at Children's Hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery. His mother says her son may have permanent injuries, preventing him from fathering children.
The doctor told me you need to press charges, and that just alarmed me.
Manning is now facing charges of aggravated assault and resisting arrest.
He don't deserve no felony. He's not a bad child. He's not in the streets.
I believe he was sexually assaulted.
The founder of the school says she was with Manning 10 minutes before the incident. She says this straight-A model student hasn't had a single discipline problem in his 3-year history at the school.
They shouldn't be able to do that to any child, but this is a 16-year-old, and that the force that was used in his private area, it sort of is concerning to me.
Now, police in the 22nd District tell us they are looking into this, and a possible internal affairs investigation may be launched in the coming days. But police also tell me that at the 8 hours that boy was in custody, he never complained, never reported any injuries. We're live in Spring Garden tonight. Chris O'Connell, Fox 29 News.
All right, Chris, thank you. A 16-year-old.
The man fled the scene of a crash.
That's right, Linda. An alleged hit and run. No details of the altercation were given, but one hearing impaired group says Pearson had a sign in his door saying driver is deaf, and they claim he was struck in the face before he had a chance to show his driver's license. These are photos of 64-year-old Pearl Pearson, a man who allegedly suffered these injuries to his face at the hands of 2 OHP troopers during a traffic stop in Oklahoma City, January 3rd. An affidavit says Pearson fled the scene of a minor crash in South Oklahoma City and was eventually pulled over here at the Eastern Avenue exit of eastbound I-40. The affidavit says Pearson resisted Trooper Foster and Trooper Hayes and refused to comply with repeated orders to display his hands. What is not listed in the affidavit, Pearson is deaf. It goes on to say a physical altercation ensued for 7 minutes. This is what Pearson looked like after being taken to a hospital, then to the Oklahoma County Jail for resisting arrest.
Unfortunately, many police do not protect the community. Many police do not serve the community. Instead of protecting and serving the community, they abuse and oppress the community. And those two news stories are prime examples of that. Here you have a young black man in the prime of his life, a scholar, an honor roll student with all A's, with no criminal history and no disciplinary history at the school. But yet the police felt the need to abuse this brother. They felt the need to basically castrate this brother. Now, for the rest of his life, he will not be able to have children. That is probably what will happen. He is probably sterile because of what that stinking police officer did. Because that police officer felt entitled to violate this brother. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter what kind of person you are. You could be a scholar, you could be a lawyer, you could be a doctor, you could be a famous entertainer, a famous athlete. But at the end of the day, many of these police officers just see a thug. Many of these police officers assume that because of the color of our skin that we are criminals. They assume that they have the right to abuse and harass us. And you have that other case of that elderly gentleman who was deaf. He wasn't able to hear what the police were saying. And so they beat him like a slave. This is nothing new. We saw what happened to Rodney King. We've heard about Oscar Grant, Sean Bell, and the brother Jonathan Farrell in North Carolina who was shot 10 times by the police. And, the jury actually decided not to indict. So we have incidents of police brutality that occur constantly around this country. And it's time for us to stand up. We need to stand up like the Black Panthers stood up in the 60s and 70s. I'm not talking about that new Black Panther group, that hate group, that group of clowns. I'm talking about the real Black Panthers. They stood up against police brutality. And it's time for Black men and women today to stand up to these police. It's time for us to organize and mobilize our communities. We must put pressure on these police departments and on the mayors and the attorney generals and even the Department of Justice to demand full and thorough investigations of these incidents. The police involved must be brought to justice. They must be punished for their crimes. And that young brother should be freed of charges. The charges should be dismissed. Now, I briefly mentioned what the community can do, but here's what each and every individual can do to protect themselves from police brutality. The first thing we must understand is when we encounter the police, we should never try to escalate the situation by yelling at the officer, by engaging in an argument with the officer. I mean, these police, a lot of times they come across real arrogant and cocky and insensitive. They come across as annoying. But instead of challenging them verbally and engaging in an argument with them, we need to remain calm and we need to take note of the situation. We need to remember the police officer's name. We need to take note of the police officer's badge number so that after the incident, we can report that police officer. We can report his misconduct or his abuse. And we can avoid a situation where the police feel justified to try to attack us. Because all they're doing is looking for an excuse to beat a black man. Don't give them that excuse. So remain calm when you encounter the police. Also, it's very important that you keep your hands where the officer can see your hands. Because they always have some excuse. They always say something like, well, we thought he was reaching for a weapon. That's what they said when they shot Amadou Diallo a lot of times. I think it was over 21 times he was shot. They shot that brother, and they said that he was reaching for what they thought was a weapon when he wasn't. So always keep your hands where the police can see them. It's important, and we've learned this, as children. We're taught how to deal with the police, but it's important to reiterate this point. Never run from the police. And we need to tell our young people never to run from the police because the police will assume that you have done some kind of crime if you run from them. And, again, that will be another excuse for them to hold you and beat you. They always look for excuses to brutalize us. So we should not give them any excuses to do so. Also, this is common sense, but it's important. Never touch a police officer. because, again, they will say that you are assaulting a police officer. They will use that as an excuse to beat you, to shoot you, to kill you. So never touch a police officer. Also, aside from the police brutality issue, aside from just interacting with the police, it's also important that you not provide any statements to the police. It's also important that you immediately invoke your right to an attorney if you are arrested. And don't volunteer any information to the police because they can use that information against you. And also, there are plenty of stories where the police have basically forced people to confess to crimes that they did not commit, by constantly interrogating people and putting them under pressure that get them to falsely confess. So it's important not to make any statements to the police. So those are just some practical tools or advice about how to deal with the police.